Okay. Okay, so thank you all very much for coming to this session. So this is, I think, the 9th installment that we have of this one. The first 7, we actually worked a lot on more user stories. The last session, it was more of an overview of where we thought of myself and Servin and Dennis going through some of what we would like to see from the project and some future development. So in this session, we will again continue on working on some of the stories that I'm going to show you in a while. So the idea that the kind of the structure that we've had for these types of sessions is we first go through the first 10-15 minutes where I go through what the project is trying to achieve. And then after that, I'm going to share my my VS Code with you, and we're going to go through the ideas that we collaboratively create some of those user stories as part of this session. As you know, all of these sessions are then put on YouTube. If you don't feel comfortable with your picture, etc., just leave your camera off. Would be great once we go after this initial 15 minutes where I'll introduce the project and what we're trying to achieve. For people to collaborate to make this a bit more engaging for all of us. But that's kind of the structure. We go through what the project is, what we're trying to achieve, and then we start building some of the stories that are still outstanding. So overall, I think we've got about 60% of the standard covered. So without further ado, let's go through these first 15 minutes to explain what the project is about. So we're going to go through what is Asvs, why shouldn't we just use it, and then we're going to go through what are the structure of stories and examples of user stories and what we'll be doing on this session. So as almost, I think it's a fair assumption to say that everyone joining this session has at least heard of Asvs. So Asvs is one of the flagship projects of OWASP that deals with application security verification. So it's the application security verification standard. As far as I'm concerned, it's a de facto standard for application security. A lot of publications refer to it. And it's obviously an OWASP project, and Open Security Summit uses a lot of open source and OWASP projects as well. So one of the challenges with Asvs is that it's kind of in a spreadsheet format, right? So there's a lot of behaviors that then are driven from governance, risk, and compliance teams that are associated with how spreadsheets are managed, how people can kind of tick boxes against items that we'll cover a bit later. So overall, the Asvs has 14 domains, 15, something along those lines. So it covers aspects of architecture, design, and threat modeling, authentication, verification, session management, access control, and all those other things that you see on the screen. The color coding is kind of suggesting what the work that we've done so far on this Asvs user stories project in terms of creating user stories that relate to each of those requirements. So as you see, there's still a lot to do, but we've done a lot over the past year. Right. So I came up originally with the idea for this project, and then Louis Servin, who hopefully will join us today. We've been kind of driving the project, but one of the things that I've noticed in my own experience as a security manager and also as a consultant was that the OWASP, the Asvs itself is very good for governance, risk, and compliance people, right? Because it gives you a view of it's a checklist. How do you do session management? Here you've got 7, 8, or 9 things that you need to do secure management properly, and it's very easy to kind of use as a tick box compliance reference by governance teams, and even allow teams to just have policies pointing to OWASP Asvs and not having to develop their own internal kind of custom approach to how to handle application security. But in my opinion, and that was the reason why I created this project, I think there's something missing in the middle between the guidance that we get from OWASP ASVS directly, which is this spreadsheet kind of tick the box type format, and the other OWASP projects that give actual guidance to engineers and developers on how can they go about it. Right? So we have the OWASP cheat sheet project that has a lot of information on how to implement access control properly in different types of languages, the same thing for session management, etc. And there are also the ASVS testing guides. There are more policy as code in some way, shape, or form that allows you to kind of copy paste if that works for you, the validation and the verification if you're meeting the ASVS standards. What I think is a bit of a black box is this kind of alchemy that happens in the middle, right? So one thing is having the requirements itself. The other thing is having the guidance on how to do it. But there's usually a thing called agile here in the middle of this black box. Right? So teams need to pick up on those kind of security requirements, if you want to call them that, of OWASP ASVS, and then transform them, add them to their own backlogs, which is done usually through user stories, through epics, through that type of structure, that then actually you can use the OWASP cheat sheet to tell you or to give you examples on how you should code in the testing guide that gives you examples on how you can verify that you're being compliant to them. So that's what this project is kind of aiming to achieve, which is kind of filling this gap between the spreadsheet format of ASVS and all of the other guidance that already exists within other OWASP projects that are more kind of engineering or specific to what we want to achieve. So with the creation of these kind of off-the-shelf user stories that we're trying to create, we believe there's benefits in this for both engineering teams and for risk and compliance. So for engineering teams, it gives you kind of off-the-shelf actionable user stories to implement the requirements that exist in the ASVS, and it's written in a structure and language that engineers are already used to, right? They're probably already using user stories for their own development. So this kind of normalizes that with the work that they're already doing and the way they already manage or structure their own work. And this becomes kind of a consumable list, right? You don't need to go there and use all of them. You can just say, I'm looking to improve access control. And then you can go to the user stories and see what makes sense in your own context to kind of contextualize the acceptance criteria and all of that. There's also big benefits for risk and compliance teams, right? Because in my opinion, I think this extends the scope or helps security teams extend the scope of how they deal with risk and compliance, right? Which often we stop at the policy or at the standard level that could potentially be an ASVS, and then leave it all of the other kind of complicated details to someone else. And what this does, it actually, if we start building the user stories and start using this Gherkin syntax BDD type approach, it actually forces us risk and compliance professionals to kind of structure in the requirement itself as a series of steps, right? Which I think is a good segue or a good introduction to start thinking about how we can potentially in the future codify all our requirements in compliance as code domain specific languages. Right? So the main benefit that we're trying to aim here is that at some point, following these user stories and the guidance in the ASVS testing guide, etc., that you would have the ability to or the capability of having your policy statements written as code that can be directly verifiable in your CI/CD systems. Right? And in this project is kind of wanting to help risk and compliance people that often don't have much programming experience, may have even chosen security because they like IT but don't like programming, and help them kind of bridge this gap into being able to codify their requirements in a slightly different way, away from having it in SharePoints or in a Word document that engineers don't actually read and have no idea what it means to their practice. So this is kind of at a high level what we want to achieve for both sides. So this is mainly a tool to facilitate communication, right? So risk and compliance usually operates at a slower tempo, right? We've got a yearly audit cycles, we've got quarterly reviews, that type of thing. And usually engineering teams, they tend to work at the sprint level, right? So they define what they're going to do in the next 2 weeks, and then they repeat the exercise again. So sometimes some of these things get lost in translation. So this is the idea is to be used as a tool to facilitate communication. So why user stories, right? The way we've been approaching requirements in security for a long time has been a lot this static view of how things should be, right? Very much based on spreadsheets or things like that give you a laundry list of things that you need to do with kind of the either underlying or explicit assumption that all of those requirements will be met all of the time, right? Which we know it's not actually the case. So I think this spreadsheet format is kind of optimized for gatekeepers, right? People in compliance and risk, they like to kind of think, we've done this one, we've done that one, now you need to go do the other three, right? It's that type of optimization. But technical teams usually work differently. So the more we can align the language that we express, the things that we want to see in our products, in the language of the people that are going to build them, understand and already used to, yeah, we would be breaking down some of those communication barriers. So what is a user story? This is obviously from the agile, etc. Literature, but a user story is a small piece of work that represents some value to an end user, right? And it usually can be delivered during a sprint. So it's about us, framing all the things that we want to do as a series of steps. So we know that, so we can provide guidance to engineering on what they're supposed to achieve. What is the acceptance criteria? How will we know that at the end of that we got exactly what we wanted? One of the ways that help us think about user stories and if we're writing good ones or not is using the INVEST criteria. So INVEST stands for a number of different things. So the first is independent. So the user story should be able to be developed in any sequence, and changes to that shouldn't affect others, right? So it's kind of this detached value of unit that we can kind of manage in a separate way. It should be negotiable, and that's one of the reasons why one of the things that I've been not so happy or not so eager to do is to add acceptance criteria as part of this project, because I think acceptance criteria is something that will always be very context dependent, right? And one of the ways that I would not like to see this project used, these people just saying, these are the stories, these are the acceptance criteria, and treat it exactly as we've been treating kind of standalone spreadsheet type requirements, right? So that's one of the reasons why we haven't been adding generally some acceptance criteria, because it needs to be localized and negotiated, right? It's this negotiable part that is kind of the job of GRC functions to have with their own internal engineering teams and have that conversation on what exactly is going to be the acceptance criteria. It should be valuable, right? So each story delivers the attached unit of value. It should be estimable. So the engineer looking at it should be able to have an idea of how much effort it's going to be to deliver that. And it should be small, right? You should be able to go through the whole cycle. And this is design, code, and test in one sprint, right? And this is also sometimes where user stories or the way we do security transformation doesn't really align with the way that that engineers already assure quality in the product, right? Which I think it's very common for us in security to design and code, but we don't always build the tests to continuously validate if our mitigations that we've put in place are still effective, right? And that is one of the things that that I think is key of trying to use user stories in security, is until you've got a test that you can ideally run locally, kind of as a minimum, but ideally adding at the end of the mitigation that you've created, you also create a test that then gets run every time someone tries to build a system through CI/CD. That's kind of the ideal, right? We not only build the mitigation, we build the verification that it's still active, and that's what's going to to give the development organization assurance that they can keep on developing at speed. Because if the mitigations that we have in place suddenly stop working, we have a test that should be able to capture that. So we know we can kind of keep on adding changes to the system because our security mitigations are being tested every time we try to deploy. And finally, the testable, right? So it should have clear acceptance criteria, and that needs to be negotiated internally. If anyone has any questions or want to make any comment in the meantime, feel free, just unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions and engage. Right, so continuing. What is the anatomy of a story? So usually a story is written in this type of structure as A, and that's usually a type of user, whoever would get the most benefit. I want something so that I get some kind of value. Right? At the moment, we're still using throughout the project largely the persona of security engineer, but that is something that we've discussed. Maybe we'd like to change in the future. For now, the priority is going to be to finish all of the actual stories, and then we will rethink if we are writing all of the requirements to the right persona, etc. But at the moment, they're mostly written as a security engineer. So, using an example from Asvs, so we have a feature that we could work would be potential HTTP response content type header specifies a safe character set, right? So that's kind of a feature. We want to ensure that the content type that we add to our website is the one that we actually need for the purposes that we're doing. It can be text if we're just showing an HTML page. It can be JSON if we're processing a JSON file, so it will depend on the context. So in this example, we could transform that into a story. As a security engineer, I want to allow only safe character sets in HTTP responses so that I can prevent unsafe character sets, which could obfuscate malicious activity. Right? That's kind of what we're trying to achieve with the implementation of this. And then after we create the story, we can think about what is the scenario, right? So for those of you familiar with that, this would be the BDD/Gherkin type syntax that really forces you to break down what it is that I'm checking and how. So this scenario that we would add to as the way to create the test that would then live to validate the mitigation, we can use this Gherkin syntax, and it has a number of different verbs, but this is kind of the most simple way to approach it, which is given an HTTP response and an HTTP security header. When I specify the allowed content type, then I only allow UTF-8 or ISO 88591. Right? And this relates to requirement 14.4 in the ASVS. Right? So basically what we've done here is we got this spreadsheet type format requirement from ASVS, and we kind of broke it down into the different pieces that it's made of, so that we write the Gherkin syntax on how we could verify or go and test how if that requirement is being met or not. So, and if what I'm trying to do with this, and particularly in terms of the potential benefits for risk and compliance folks, is that if you can write this type of syntax, right? If you can think of, we need to verify that all HTTP responses have this type of thing, and if you can write it in Gherkin syntax, translating into a compliance as code domain-specific language is relatively trivial. Right, you really don't need to be a super expert in development or programming to do much of this. So in this instance, for instance, this is using Chef Inspec, which is a compliance as code domain-specific language, but there are other ones out there like Open Policy Agent and some other ones. But basically, what the actual test is very simple. We are using an HTTP module, right, that is going to make some HTTP requests. I am giving it a URL. And what it's going to do is it's going to check the headers, specifically content type, and I expect that the response that I get is text HTML charset equals UTF-8. Right? And this is a test that you can run dynamically, right? Because this is actually making an HTTP request, and you now have your policy 14.4.1 that every response, your requirement from ASVS 14.4.1, you actually now have it codified as code that you can then integrate into your quality assurance process, to your validation every time someone commits code and they get the feedback if they're meeting the organizational security requirements. So that's kind of the general idea. Right. So any questions? So this was kind of the introduction that we usually do on these sessions, just to kind of explain what the project is, and what we've been doing in some sessions is either work directly out of this of these slides. I can send you the link if you want to do that. Or in the last few sessions, we've been doing it slightly different, which is I've been kind of sharing my screen. And we've been going through my VS Code and going through the different files and doing it kind of live, as opposed to doing it on the slides. Questions, comments? Anyone want to contribute anything?
I just want to say that I'm sorry about the name on this, because I think I'll give my wife account. But this kind of practice is one of the few things I see that can really scale. I think that we're at the point where we haven't really got it to really, be scaling at the point where a high level of usage, but this is the one that deals with real world, right? Because in the real world, you need this level of control. You need this level of customization. And I think what Mario's been doing here, which is pretty spectacular, is trying to connect these dots with the Asvs, which if you think about it, has been going on for a long time, right? But the adoption, I was always getting limited by the fact that everybody goes, this is great, I get it. But when you go, cool, how are we making scale? You really hit the block, because either you have a massive team that gets to maintain it with a massive overhead, or you just can't, right? So this is, for me, is the way to scale. And this be able to write tests, we then actually do the tests in the real world, is absolutely key to scale this kind of tests.
Yep. In the how is also important, following on from that, right? So it's very easy to just be here and say, look, we've got these things called compliance as code DSLs that we can actually use and leverage, which is good. And if you've got the organizational structure to support that, fair enough and brilliant. On the other aspect, not everyone may have that type of capability, right? So, for instance, in a place that I was working previously, I did not have the organizational affordance to have people writing policy tests as code. So what we did instead was teach developers that they were already using Test Cafe and Cucumber and all of that, and they do it in their own preferred language, right? There's nothing here in terms of the compliance as code DSLs that is kind of unique, right? It's just, you make a bunch of requests, or you look at a config file and you make some assertions on what you see there. It's kind of that simple.
But that's the key word you just said there, right? I think we need to get the developers to write this, right? And I have to say, I said something quite politically incorrect in the last session with threat modeling, but I actually think that we should probably call this out. So we would talk about how to scale threat modeling, right? And how to do threat modeling, and who should do it first, right? And then the argument was, I was saying that, look, we should get the threat modeling teams to embrace this because they already have the pain, right? And then the other argument was, yeah, but some of them are very happy with just not doing it automated, doing on a piece of paper and doing kind of more traditional threat models, right? That don't scale. And I think we need to start calling out the security teams too, right? To say, look, if, imagine a developer that tries to do this in this way, but doesn't have the support of a security team that doesn't believe on it, then we need to start calling out that the security teams that, if they are not already frustrated and want to embark on this journey, they are part of the problem, right? Yeah, because they're the ones who are already not scaling, right? Because we need this to be customized. And yes, ultimately, the reason why I need to be customized because it depends on the application. It will change through the life cycle of the application. New features will make change to behaviors that you need to adjust these tests. So unless these tests are maintained and edited by the QA or test or developer team, you would never really scale, right?
Yep. And that is actually one thing that I gave a talk about 5 or 6 months ago, I think, for InfoQ, that I touched exactly on that, right? Because the thing that we in security overall, I think we're still not really optimizing for the value chain, right? We still have a lot of work to do to optimize for the value chain. And what I mean by that in this context is, when you don't have the capability of codifying your requirements as code as part of a GRC function, right? If your GRC function doesn't have the ability to codify things as code, then what happens is you're going to have these kind of documents that sit on a SharePoint or something along those lines that kind of don't really translate to the truth. That then you'll be having negotiations and meetings and conversations with engineering to figure out what exactly goes into the scope of a project. Then after that, you're going to have all of this stuff on the user stories, etc., of defining the work and refining the work that actually needs to be done. And then someone actually needs to write a test to integrate into your CI/CD process. Right? All of that is much more optimized if you think, maybe this compliance team, we could actually, instead of getting one more compliance person, let's get a QA engineer and let's get him the job of actually writing all of this down. So at that point, you save yourself the translation layer of the policy to engineering, of the engineering to user stories, and to the tests themselves. People can just run the tests and know exactly straight away whether you've defined them or not, if they're meeting the requirement. So all of that value chain is now optimized because you brought the skill that didn't exist on a particular function to a function, so that the artifacts that they deliver can be directly used in the process instead. Right? So that's kind of another one of my rants, but we'll get there at some point. Right, any other questions or comments from anyone?
Yeah, probably what I could say is that in a perspective of someone that usually does not the development of the code, but instead the verifying the security of the code, what we've been seeing is that it's difficult to get the kind of persons which are developing code to adopt some kind of framework that brings the security to their work, to that they deliver to their customers. And that's been our most painful job, is to make understand the development teams that they have to incorporate the security in their code. And that has to be something that has to be born in the first stages of the projects, and not exactly what mostly is being done nowadays. That is, yeah, we develop the code, and then just for some kind of compliance, we will send it to someone that makes the SAST or the DAST reviews, so that we can just make a check mark on the compliance that we have to comply to.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think a part of the challenge, I think, at least from experience, is the issue of how policies are set up and managed in organizations. Kind of the structure between risk management and policy management is usually not very well aligned to support all of this. Right? So to give you a very specific example, and something that I've done for 2 clients in the past year. So just the fact that we kind of took all of the technical stuff out of the main security policies and then created a very specific product security policy that looked specifically at the applications, at infrastructure, and set requirements directly on that you can then have either your SRE function or some other type of engineering function actually owning the policy. Just that small change alone, I've got great mileage out of all of that. Usually the challenge is the way we align policy and risks, how they bubble up to product risk levels, or all of that. Usually that has a big impact on how much people are willing to kind of take their work for themselves, or they expect someone else to tell them what it is that they need to do, right? But it's the aspects of, yeah, usually policy and risk management is not very aligned in organizations, in my experience. So yeah, I like the SAPS approach to all of that, where you really need to have a direct relationship between both. Cool. So thank you all very much. Let's so what I would suggest, let's have a look here. So this is currently, and actually let me show you, I'm going to post the link here so that everyone has access to the right document. So at the moment, the project is living in the Open Security Summit organization in GitHub. Let me just paste the link here. So you can copy, this is all, we already put a license here, didn't we? We did not, I thought we did. Yeah, but this is, what don't we? I thought we had, yes, CC BY SA, exactly. So Creative Commons, you can do whatever you want, just say where you took it from originally. So this is what we currently have built. We have API, web service, authentication, configuration, and there's a bunch of things in them that we still haven't covered. So last time, if I recall correctly, we were working on data protection. I think that Lewis had done the file stuff altogether, and we were working on data protection. So out of all of the things that that we have here, I'm happy to hear suggestions on things that you are particularly interested in, or areas of ASVS that you've got a particular interest in. We could potentially work on those. So configuration, verification, API, and authentication. No, authentication isn't completely done. I think we have 2, 2, 3, and I don't think we 2.2.3. Sorry. 2.2.3. Yeah, this. So we got here. We have still plenty of stuff to do on authentication, as I thought. So yeah. Any suggestions? Anything that people would like to work on today, and we can create some user stories collaboratively together in this session. Hi Ben, nice to see you.
Yeah, had a good session with Luis yesterday, so we kind of like all linked together and had a good chat with Josh on the OWASP structures. So yeah, good.
Nice.
Sorry I was late. I had another call.
Yeah, no worries. Right. So if no one has any suggestions, I'm going to kind of crack on with the authentication part, and we just do a few more on those. So yeah, we can probably run for another hour or so. So let's go about and do that. So we left it at 2.2.3, which is, let me put this on a single page. Verify that secure notifications are sent. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so basically what we've been doing here, it's let's create a new file. And this will be 224. Authentication. I think this is still an Authenticator, isn't it? Yes. Authenticator, and this requirement is specifically on impersonation resistance. And so basically what we've been doing, so we are going to normalize after we finish all of that, the structure, but largely we've been following this. Yeah, we are probably going to use metadata a bit better in the future versions, but for now this is kind of what we have. So just changing the high level stuff.
Oh, sorry, do you mean you're going
Yep.
to template it so that you can then basically pre-fill that when you create new user story?
So we will create it in a format where it's easier to translate between different formats like JSON, CSV, etc. So at the moment, some of these tags that we are using, they could do some work to make it more easy to search and all of that.
Yeah, a bit like the stuff that Luis has done for his kind of the LaTeX mapping stuff.
So it's to enable that to be done much easier than it currently is.
Sure, okay.
Because once we've got kind of the metadata part of that all okay, then it's easier to kind of create structures and even induce kind of as JSON, right? We dot our way through getting to the right things that we want.
Yeah.
Right, 2.2.4, and this is about verifying impersonation resistance against phishing, such as MFA, crypto devices with intent, such as connected keys with a push to authenticate, or at high AL levels, client-side certificates. Impersonation resistance against phishing, such as the use of multi-factor authentication. Okay, this will be an interesting one. Let's have a look. So the thing about this one for me is that this impersonation resistance is a pretty big beast, right? They use the such as to talk about MFA, but it probably has much more stuff inside it. So let's just have a look what the CWE says. CWE 308. So 308 is really just about using multi-factor authentication, and let's see what the NIST control 525. Is this on this document? Is it on 800B? I can never recall which, I think it is, but 5.2.5. I'm not sure it's this document, but let's see if 5 makes sense here. Yeah, Authenticator, yes it is, 5.2.5.
Verify impersonation resistance, yeah?
Yes. So let's 5.1, 5.2.5, yeah, which is, yeah, overall impersonation resistance. So, but so the CWE just talks about single factor, right? But here we have automated protection channel with the verifier and strongly irreversibly bind the channel identifier that was negotiated. Validate signatures.
It's about man in the middle, isn't it? So
yeah. So client authenticated TLS. No entry shall not be considered. Oh, that's interesting. I'm learning new things. I didn't know they considered this. So it seems that authenticators that involve the manual entry of an authenticator output, OTP authenticators, shall not be considered verifier impersonation resistance because the manual entry does not bind the authenticator output to the specific session. I didn't know they took this, this view of it. That's interesting. Cool. So trying to be pragmatic here, let's have a look at how we would build the user story. So actually, something else to reference in terms of the structure of the project itself. So what we've been doing so far, generally speaking, is we at the top we define what the user story is for this particular requirement, and then on the scenarios we may have one or more scenarios where we go through each of the different ways that we could potentially approach meeting this requirement. Okay, so for instance, in this case on verify impersonation resistance, I think we could have at least two scenarios, which is one of them for the enablement of multi-factor authentication, so not using single factor, and the other one being this client authenticated TLS, which is another way of approaching the issue. Any comments on that? I think that's probably the most pragmatic way to approach that. So having said that, using what would we call this, the feature name? The potentially impersonation resistance against phishing. Yeah, that's a feature, right? That's kind of what we want to do overall. So how would we build a user story for this?
Sorry, you said there were two user stories. The first one, or you?
No, I suggested there is one user story in two scenarios.
And two scenarios.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a scenario for
each one, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Multi-factor authentication, and the other one for client authenticated TLS.
Yeah. Okay.
So as a security engineer, I want to verify extension resistance. I want to resistance to impersonation attacks, so that I have assurance that my users are who they claim to be. This could work. Any thoughts on changing this to something different? Yeah, I think that that's good enough. Cool. So let's go on to the next one. So the scenarios, we talked about two scenarios, which was one of the scenarios was enable multi-factor authentication.
And the second was TLS, client authentication.
Yeah, client-side authentication, right? And the second one would be enable client-side. Wait.
But if you're creating a key pair on the browser, I don't see why that is. Right, okay.
Sorry, say it again.
So if you're creating a key pair on the browser with TLS, client authentication, then isn't that just as the same as, you could still have a man in the middle if someone gets to the browser?
So client-side TLS would, so you would assume a certificate, right, of some kind in that authentication.
Okay.
So yeah, there would be the security would rest on that on whatever certificate, on the security of that certificate that you use for client-side TLS.
Okay.
So given given the need to authenticate users, right? So if you don't authenticate users, you don't need to worry about this, right? Or the parts that where you don't have that. So given the need to authenticate users, when users log in, then I request a second factor for authentication. No, then I This will then depend on the actual service, but this could be kind of written in two ways. So the first thing is someone connects with the first factor, right? Usually the username password pair in most cases, and then you would have the multi-factor kicking in. So when users log in, then I authenticate them using username password pair ends and I authenticate users with a second factor. Do you do it like that? Maybe we need to clarify what we mean by factors here. With a second factor that we could so OTP Authenticator. Actually, let's follow the same structure that we've done in other ones, which is kind of define this as something different. Why did this not do what I wanted it? Because it's already inside the yep. Second, it's already inside the Gherkin syntax stuff, so I need to do it outside. So, second factor, right? That can be OTP, one-time password, magic links, or indicator app codes. Is there any other that you kind of think remember off the top of your head that is common or largely common? So I think OTPs, magic links, or Authenticator app codes are kind of the most common that people use these days as second factors.
Yep.
So let's leave it at that. And so the second scenario would be enabling client-side TLS auth. So let's have a look.
Any other one is QR codes in banking. I've seen those. You've got some QR codes used in banking.
Okay. Interesting. I've never seen that.
Yeah, Starling Bank are using that on there.
Okay. Or QR codes.
On a mobile, you go on the website and then you take the QR code and it uses that to kind of like a magic link.
Interesting. Okay, so looking at this one, we have client-side authentication. So we can start like the previous one, given the need to authenticate users when users log in, and I authenticate them. And validates the client-side certificate provided by the user. That's about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that works. Yeah, so here it was 308, not 521, the CWE link. And yeah, it's authentication cheat sheet, and I don't think I've got any chef inspec or OPA links to add here. So I think this one is it. If everyone's happy, I'm going to save and move on. Cool. So why isn't this saving? Yeah, I'll check it later. So let's look at the next one. So we've done 2.2.4, verify impersonation resistance. The next one would be verifiable or credential service provider. Yeah, calling CSP something else is credential service provider and the application. Where a credential service provider and the application verifying authentication are separated, mutually authenticated TLS is in place between the two endpoints. Okay, so this is kind of the use case if we're using kind of Auth0 or Okta or something like that, that the request from my website to theirs is done encrypted. I think that's kind of what I'm reading. Is that how you are reading that as well?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so let's do this. 225 is CSP communication. I'm going to call it CSP communication. File 225 authentication. So what was the CSP communication?
So in the comments here, would you put a link that's resolvable back to the NIST standard or not?
We could. So in probably in the scenario that we do after, there would probably when we get to the point where we kind of revisit the metadata, I'm sure that that could do, but unless I'm mistaken, and it's been a while since, actually, let's have a look. So one of the things that I don't think exists on the ASVS itself is an independent or independent links for each of the requirements. So the link, if that doesn't exist, the link would not be easy to get to. Right?
Yeah, no, that's what Luis was showing yesterday, how he does it, creates those links and put them in. But that's what the conversation with Josh was.
But that's the automation that he creates around all of that. It's not links to the actual ASVS, right?
No.
It's within the all of their magic that he does.
No,
okay.
what I'm saying is, if you've got a, like a NIST reference, you could almost put, I mean.
Oh yeah. So that's what we've been doing overall here. So with cheat series and all of that, and the connections to CWE. So if we've got we thought about it. I thought about it just now, but for instance, here on NIST, I don't really have a link to point here.
Yeah, I mean,
if I did, I would, but
yeah, you got a link to the document, and then you could just say 525 as being the example at the end. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
that works. Let's do that. This would be.
It's just that we've got two cases here. One is very much tied to the NIST thing, and the other one is just kind of more general, isn't it? Yeah,
it's 5.25. Yeah, we can leave kind of a reference like this. And again, as I mentioned, the whole structure, we still need to think about it. So we can leave that to a later date to figure out how that would work.
It's just, this is now.
Sorry, actually, it's not this.
Not there. It's
this one. It's 2.2.4. This is probably a different one. Yep, I agree. And this mapping is useful, particularly with things like CWE or NIST or.
Yeah, it's self-referencing, basically.
Yep. Okay, so let's copy this part. Oh, I just noticed someone said something on chat. Let me have a look in a minute.
All I did was I just put the block in.
It was yourself. Okay.
Yeah, I just put the block of text in from that section, just about.
Okay. Thank you. Application for fine. Yeah. Okay. So this feature name is encrypted comms between application and CS and credential service provider. So as a security engineer, I want to encrypt communications between my application and my credential service provider so that I protect all authentication traffic from Authentication from loss of confidentiality. No, but that probably doesn't read very well. So that I protect all authentication traffic between these endpoints. Probably works.
To prevent
You suggest, yep, that works. So that I prevent in the middle text, which could expose credentials. Yep.
Yep.
Probably works. Cool. So the scenario is really just verify kind of encryption TLS probably. Does it say TLS or does it just say encryption?
It says TLS.
Yeah, mutual authenticated TLS. Okay. So the scenario name is encryption of authentication traffic. So given the need to authenticate users, when users log in, then I not connect verify credentials against my credential service provider, and I ensure that the traffic is TLS protected. That work?
Yep.
Yep. Probably doesn't need to be much more complicated than that. Yeah, we don't have a second scenario on this one. So we've got, what is the CWE on this one? 319. 319, and it's NIST 526. Cool. And that's it. That's another one done. Untracked. Yeah, I don't know what's happening here, but I'll figure out later. This should be, yeah, saving it, but I'll do that in a minute. So where were we? Yeah, so we did 2.2.5. Let's look at 2.2.6. Verify replay resistance through the mandated use of OTP devices, cryptographic authenticators, or lookup codes. Verify replay resistance through mandated use of OTP devices. So in terms of testing, this is saying that we should try to so the way, yeah.
So in the one above, wasn't it 525 we were looking at? The
no, 226. Sorry,
okay,
we're looking at this one now. I was just trying to make sense of what this says. So replay resistance. I'm not sure how to dissect this one. Let me look at the CW to see if it's more. So one of the things that I'm thinking, but I'm not sure that that's the right way to read this, is that so if I, for instance, yeah, this is replay resistance. So if someone was to use, for instance, an old token of some kind to try and replay traffic, that it shouldn't use because their authentication is no longer valid. That's kind of what I'm reading, but I'm not sure that's kind of correct. But let's look at the CWE to see if
Yeah, it talks about if
all
their
that.
given password matches the stored password. But that's
Is it? Is that on NIST?
that's on CWE 308.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just single factor authentication, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't go into. Yes, the user is logged in if their given password matches a stored password. Yeah. Let's see what 528 says on
It
NIST.
says freshness. It's about making sure you're resistant to replay because you can check that you haven't got an old message being replayed.
Yeah, this is an addition to the replay resistant nature of authenticated protection channels, since the output could be stolen prior to entry into the protected channel. Ah, okay. So this is about the use of nonces and challenges to prove the freshness of the transaction. Yeah. Nonces or timeliness. Yeah. In contrast, you don't consider Authenticator output is source provided for each authentication. Okay, fair enough. So basically, we want to ensure that we're using protocols that use nonces or challenges to prove yeah, the validity of the transaction. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's a bit clearer. So 6 authentication. So this was about replay protection.
Here's the definition of that from the NIST site.
Oh, that you added here?
In the chat, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the NIST guidance is much less cryptic than the ASVS one. Yep. Right, so what could be a feature name on this?
Replay, you know, I
Yeah.
want to use replay resistance because
Yep.
I think
Authenticated transactions.
Yeah.
Authenticated transactions. Okay. Okay, as a security engineer, I want
to check that a value has never been repeated.
I want to check that protocols used are resistance against replay. So they're not expired, so they're compromised credentials don't allow access to my application. They're not compromised, so they're there was a word that they used, so they're not the compromised credentials, it's the actual replay of the traffic, right? So that any thoughts on how to construct that? Resistance against replay attacks. So that.
So I mean, it's about repeating that that there isn't an imposter there, isn't it? So that
so that repeated traffic doesn't. So let's repeat traffic.
Prevents an imposter, so that an imposter does not replay authentication on a different channel.
Sorry, could you say that again?
So that I'm just reading the NIST stuff. It says so that an imposter does not replay the credentials on a different channel.
Good. If NIST says it's because it's good. So let's go to the scenario.
Yeah, better than ours anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And that's good enough. So yeah, the scenario name would be verifiable resistance. Yeah. Yeah, we probably would need some of the other Gherkin verbs for this one. And when, then, and or but. Okay, but let's see if we can use that here. So here we're still so where do we start? We start with we want to ensure that if we replay traffic, that it doesn't allow for the same transaction to be processed twice, right? That we've got the first one, which is a valid nonce that is added or challenge added to the response. Yeah, then we want to replay that traffic and make sure that the same traffic is not going to actually make the transactions, right?
Yeah.
So given an authenticated transaction, when transaction traffic is replayed, then I verify the nonce or challenge response authentication protocol, and I don't process the request if the nonce or challenge don't match. Oh, if the nonce or challenge is repeated. I think that's it, right? yeah, I think I'll put this on the category of good enough to get the document finished, but this is probably one that could do with an actual QA engineer looking at it. But we don't have one available, so let's move on. So where were we? Okay. So what I wanted to do is 308. 308, and it's NIST 528. Cool. And that's it. So we can move on to 2.2.7. So verify intent to authenticate by requiring the entry of an OTP token or user-initiated action, such as button press on a FIDO hardware key. Okay, understood. What does 529 say on NIST? Out of curiosity.
I'll just have a quick look. It says
authentication intent.
Yeah, it's a physical authenticators, basically, isn't it?
Yep. It's a physical manifestation of some kind. Right? So if you've got a YubiKey, it's forcing you to kind of put your finger there to
it's
the
touching the button, so you get a signal, or it's triggering it with a face, or press a button on the device, isn't it?
Yep. Okay, let's do this. So that's 227, right? Yep.
Well, the thing is, Mario, once you've written these, it'd be great to have these available as a library that, because people aren't gonna, and this is quite a lot of work to write this. You want to have to do this every time over and over again. It'd be great to have this in another section of ASVS, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that's kind of the plan of what we talked about on the last session that we had of these with Lewis. So from my point of view, my number one priority on the project is really finish the whole standard, right?
Yeah,
even if the quality can then be improved over time. After we have that in place, it's really after we agree what is the structure that this should have, then it's going to make all of that much easier, right? The idea being we could even I don't know, expose this on an API that you can dot your way through it, right? I want authentication, a 2.5, right, as a reference, and then it would give you the information that you're looking for. But that's definitely the plan. And after we get all of the stories done, to normalize all of the metadata and the tags that we're using so that we can make it very easy to search. 227. This is the last one on the Authenticator. Sorry, what was the name? I got a bit lost now.
Physical. Yeah, physical. Which includes
physical intent.
Yeah,
physical.
Yeah.
Okay, so the feature name is confirmation of user intent for authentication. So we want them to confirm that they're doing that. So as a security engineer, I want to the word I'm thinking about is force, but I don't want to, but I don't like the word. So what I was thinking, I want to, it's not really established, right? So what I was trying, the way I was thinking in my head to translate this is I want to force the user to give me the physical intention,
Input,
right?
yeah.
So that I can then be sure that that he is attempting to authenticate, right? That it's
Yeah,
not
exactly.
just a normal process doing all of that. So, sorry, what were the words that you were using? Sorry.
Or confirm physical entry or something like that.
Yeah.
Confirm physical input.
I want users to confirm
Physical device input.
physical.
And that might be a biometric, that might be a button press, or might be a, you know, like with the UV key touching you.
For authenticating them, so that I have confirmation
Of human, well, I mean, yeah, of human interaction, basically.
Yeah.
It's because what you're trying to prevent is someone just spoofing it remotely to.
Yeah. Yeah, and just using programmatic methods to do the authentication. Right here, we want to ensure it's not just a programmatic type access. Someone is physically touching.
It's like a recapture or a, you know, it's a physical, you know, human, isn't it?
Yep. So I have physical device input before authenticating them, so that I have confirmation that the user is
physically present.
Yep. The authentication process. Yep. Yeah, that's good. Physically present. I like that word. Okay, so the scenario name would be user physical presence. Yeah, bit of a mouthful, but probably works. Okay, so here we are kind of trying to authenticate, right? So it's not so much, it's about the authentication process itself. So given the need to authenticate users, when the user starts the login process, then I authenticate them. So what I was thinking was, so when the user starts this login process, I'm going to authenticate them through whatever means.
Then I ask them to physically input. Yeah, because you're asking them to respond. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something missing here on after this authenticate them, but let's move on to the next one. And I require the user to prove physical presence.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Then we can add. So in this will be the pin, but you can say here, proving presence can be done through an OTP token or through pressing a button on vital hardware key. Authenticate them using available methods, and I require the user to prove physical presence. I think that works.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So what was the 308 and 529? So 308 is there and 529 on list. And I think that's it. And that is it for Authenticator. Yeah, there was general Authenticator requirements. What we have now, why isn't this changing to the page I want? No. Oops. Just 2.5 point. Sorry. I am moving this way too fast. Yeah, the thing. Let me put the view on continuous scroll. Otherwise, I'm gonna get lost. Lookup secret verifier. Credential. Sorry, where were we? 2.27. Okay. How much before 2.2.7? Okay, that's it. So we are now going to the Authenticator lifecycle requirements. That's interesting. This is a cool one. Cool. Let's do this. So 2.3.1, which is authentication, Authenticator lifecycle. And the first one is, that's kind of password. This is not password complexity, right? This is initial password settings. It's not just complexity, it has a couple of other things.
It's not change me 1, 2, 3, but I mean, most of the NIST advice now is around dictionaries, isn't it? Making sure you haven't got stuff in the dictionary.
Yep, true. 2.3.1. This is authentication. Life cycle. And it was about initial password settings, probably. Okay, so let's copy paste. So we have 2.3.1. Copy. Oops. Oh, interesting. Here we go. So verify the system generated initial passwords or activation codes should be securely randomly generated, should be at least 6 characters long, and may contain letters and numbers, and expire after a short period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting they don't mention dictionary, isn't it? Because they're, you know, on the other, I forget what the number of the standard is, but they talk about dictionary there, don't they?
Yeah.
Okay. Because if you knew that a bank always says change me 1, 2, 3 on the, you know, then you,
Yeah. Okay, so feature name. The feature name is initial system password, right?
Yeah.
Initial system password for users. So as a security engineer, I want users be assigned a temporary and secure password.
Temporary password of sufficient security.
Initially, yeah, initially assigned a temporary and secure password so that, what did you say, sorry?
No, that, yeah, sorry, I was talking about that sentence. So that, yeah. Wait, so that, so you want, so the initial logon is for the right user. Because this is a once they've initially logged in, then you want to force them to change password.
Exactly.
So the initial logon is not compromised.
Yeah, so the initial logon. Yep. So the scenario name is a kind of construction of initial system password. Okay, now this is the type of thing that that is interesting to kind of go through because it has a bit of logic onto all of that. So, given a user registration event, right? So this is the user is going to register on our website, right? And that's why we have the need to assign them with an initial password. So given a user registration event, when I set an initial password or activation code for the user, then I generate it securely and randomly. And I enforce a minimum password of characters. Do we add a may? I'd be tempted to just ignore that may, but it's, oh no, because a may, yeah, in a requirements document is a bit weird, right? So if people don't have letters and numbers, it would still meet the standard as written, right? So from, you're on mute, Ben. I can see your lips move.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to check, because I mean, I see some people have dropped off because I'm just wanted to check in just terms of, because obviously there's a lot of detail here. Just what's the next stages we're going to go through once we got to the end point, just so for whoever's left on, we can explain what the next stage is, because I'm interested in it. It's just checking who else is on there.
No, sounds good. So what I would suggest is let's just finish this one so we don't leave it kind of in the middle. And then let's have that conversation. I would also like to kind of wrap up about at least 10 minutes before to kind of go downstairs, because there's the other event at 6 that I'd like to join as well.
Yeah, no
I'll probably join for the first 20 minutes or so. So yeah, let's just finish this one and then let's have that that conversation.
Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't want to break your flow, but I just thought.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, and it's been a tough day, a long day.
Friday night, people start getting ready for their beer.
Yep, and my son yesterday decided that he's now concerned that people are going to come through our house, and I didn't actually sleep much. So yeah, it's been a tough day. So let's just finish this one and then let's have that conversation. So, and I enforce, yeah, I'm going to kind of dismiss the may from the logic. So, and I enforce a minimum length of 6 characters. And I set it to expire. I'm just going to put after X minutes. It's probably doesn't make much sense to set an actual value here. And I don't allow. Let me write it first and let's see if it makes sense. I don't allow this initial password to be used for more than X days. Yep. And I think, and this would be, I think this is an example of something that a QA engineer could really pick up and say, okay, now I know how to write the test to validate that what's happening here.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Because you test it every day for 10 days and then find when it fails.
Yep. Okay, so the last thing is just verifying what's the, it's 330 for CWE. 330, and it's NIST 5112/A3. What's that /A3?
Hold on, let's look at it.
1.2. Does that document have an annex?
Hold on, just getting to the right place. 1.1.
Okay.
1.1.2.
A3 complexity.
Yeah, that's it. It's looking like a sub bullet, isn't it?
Ah, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's that make sure that people don't use password 1, password 2, password 3, and etc.
Yeah, that's what I said. The dictionary.
Yeah.
You know, because that's
Yeah,
what
exactly.
the new NIST advice says. Look at the dictionary.
Yep.
Because in fact, the complexity stuff has gone away now. It's
Yeah.
so many people still don't do it, but.
Yeah, but I don't think it makes sense in the context of this requirement.
Well, no, it's just if
right? Because
well,
it's
it's like
initial password, right? It's
yeah, but the scenario would be on initial password. Say you knew that Barclays Bank always used the date and change me on their password, then you'd be able to pick up you could brute force a number of users and with a number of email addresses and just try that initial logon. And
yes, but if that was the case, it wouldn't meet this part, right? Because you didn't generate the security randomly, right? So I think it's already embedded here.
Okay.
So I think I'll just leave the reference to. Yeah, we can leave it like that. It's a reference that exists. So yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, we did how many today? This is actually quite nice. We did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was cool. Nice. I'll keep on doing it. Okay, so next steps for the project. I know that Lewis, so he couldn't join us today, unfortunately. But yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to catch up with him. So he's been doing all of that work of getting all of these documents. Sorry.
Yeah, to basically interpret the markdown and reformat it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you extract
so that we then have the benefit of changing formats very easily, right? To create CSV or JSON or all of that type of stuff. So for me, there are 3 things that are going to happen next, but we need to agree on timelines with Lewis and whoever else who would like to join all of this. But for me, the 3 main priorities in this order are get the standard finished first. I think we are kind of 65-70% on it. So I'm actually going to I'm doing a lot of writing because I'm writing a book, but I think I'm going definitely to have time in the next 3 weeks to a month, and I'm going to be spending 1 or 2 hours, at least a few hours a week to do all of this in my own time. So I personally want to get this done in the next month and a half, 2 months tops. So that we can then think about the other stuff. So that's one. It's the focus on getting the first version out, covering the whole standard. The second thing, which we can kind of start in parallel, is we need to organize with Lewis and whoever wants to be part of that, and to think about what is the structure of the document that you want in the metadata. Right? So what I mean by that is, so these things that we have here, do we want to capture requirement descriptions? If we do, how are we going to capture that within the document? Is user story and feature name and story the right thing that we want to capture in scenarios? It's kind of going back to basics and on the structure that we've defined, see if this is the type of structure that we would want to expose on a JSON or a CSV, etc. Because the way this structure was created was largely following the format of what we have on the OWASP project for cloud security, where they have a bunch of Gherkin stories already written for cloud security. So there wasn't much thinking involved, right? So I just picked up the structure that they already had, and I kind of copied that and started doing my own thing. but because we want to use this in a slightly different way, I think, yeah, now is the time to think exactly what we want out of that. So I definitely would like to have in that conversation yourself, Ben, if you're available, and also Dennis and Lewis. I think at least those four, and obviously whoever else wants to join, everyone's always welcome to do it.
There's another guy called Josh, who is in Israel, and he was the he's the first guy on the GitHub for the ASVS. We had an interesting conversation with him because at the moment what you're doing is you're taking what is a markdown document with all the, basically a narrative document with labels, with kind of sections, and then there's a bit of narrative on the sections. And what Luis said yesterday is, oh, look, I ignore all the labels. All I want is the underlying controls. And I had a suggestion that obviously a lot of people are wedded to that structure, and that's what Luis has kind of decomposed using his manipulation. But if you structure it slightly differently, if what you maintained was originally just a table of only the underlying controls, and then you have another table of the sections and labels, you could have columns on the back of it. You can still generate your markdown, but it means that you could call directly to an API and you keep up to date with all the fundamental controls.
Yep. So one of the things that we talked about last time, let me see if I can find you an example, was potentially to use a structure similar to OSS. Do you know what that is?
No.
Let me show you quickly. So if you go to the Open Security Summit site itself, you will have the, I think it's here on static, content, participant. Yeah. So here you've got pages. Oh, this is actually pictures. I'm not interested in people's pictures. It's probably not on static. Where will it be? Maybe assets.
It was just what was interesting.
Dennis still there? No.
No.
Yeah. So basically, what it is there? Yeah, I can't remember which specific page that stuff is in. But what we had talked about.
But the key elements are in a format, are they, that you can?
No, they're not. So the way it's something like this, right? So yeah, I can't find the right file, but you will have a structure with something at the beginning, right, and then the actual text, and then this makes it really easy for Lewis and for any process, any automation to just come here. You pick up the key value pair. Between a title and the description, whatever you want to put inside it, and that's kind of the way that you can navigate, and you can add this in as JSON, CSV, or whatever, and helps you navigate all of the thing a bit better.
Yeah, great. I mean, maybe you can send me the example. I'll understand that a bit better. But what I was saying was, look, the fundamental underlying control is what you're running off, and then it's put forward as a document. But the documents are really good when you first read it through, but it's not great for programmatically doing this mapping and linking. And and when I spoke to Josh, he said, "Oh no, we can't, because there are so many other people using that document. We can't put links in." And the stuff I've been doing around mapping, if you broke it out and said, "We get your core elements," and I'll send you a diagram. I'm putting it together for Josh and for Luis, and then you have. So you think about that fundamental control with your level 1, level 2, level 3, and then your CWE, and that's what everyone's used to. But if you then had beyond that, you could have all the anything else. You could have another column for labels. You could then have a section label that said, "This is in this section. Here's the text that goes with that section on another table." And you could then have another set of mapping that links to it. Now you can still generate your markdown in the same way you can. So instead of trying Luis trying to decompose a markdown document to get the fundamental pieces, if you held it as the fundamental pieces and then created that legacy markdown document, you could then have an API that went straight after the underlying pieces.
Yep, definitely. So if you've got any examples to share, that would be great.
No, it's just I'm talking to CIS and CSA as well, and if we can get OWASP, CIS, and CSA all to have the same kind of mapping, and then you can link that out to NIST, it means, because I look at the NIST documents and like we were saying, it's really difficult to link to it. But if you can have the links underneath it, it means you can tie these things together.
Yep. So are you familiar with the OpenCRE project?
No.
It's also an OWASP project run by the OWASP Integrations. So, you know, there's an initiative called OWASP Integrations where Rob van der Veert and Spiros, they do a lot of stuff there. So I had a call with Spiros, who is one of the project leaders 2 days ago, something like that. And they're interested in the Asvs user story stuff that I'm doing as well. Yeah. But basically what they've done is org maybe.
Yeah, I've got it. OpenCRE.org. Yeah.
So basically what they've built, they already have this built to an extent. So if you want to search here for instance, for access control, you can see here. So this is what NIST says about access control. You've got here some cheat sheets. You've got, if you want to go to, you can basically navigate all of this in a much easier way. So you know that data access control, you can see what it relates to in NIST. I don't think they've done ISO yet. This is largely related to NIST at the moment. You can kind of navigate all of the standards, right? They're kind of made a mapping between them, you can just go through them.
Oh yeah, I'll go and have a look at this. This is a really good point, because the problem for me is that when you look at the mappings that people have done here, they're always subjective. So there's an individual subjective mapping. Yeah. And what you really want to do is traverse a graph where you've got, if you've got everyone's mappings in a graph, then you can look at the weights of that and see if you reverse and traverse it the other way, you can see whether there's some subjectivity where someone. Because what I found when I did the mappings for the media ones, you could see where people had run out of effort. They just got fed up with it and hadn't done it. So if you flip it around the other way, you can see there are whole kind of trees that are blanked off. So yeah, my idea was, and maybe this is the way of doing it, if you took all the different linking and put it into a single graph database, you could then check out what the weights are and you get rid of that subjectivity.
Fair enough. But well, the initial mappings will always be manual, right? It needs to be a human kind of figuring out if.
But it's, you're kind of crowdsourcing it. You're kind of saying, well, this is what CIS say, this is what NIST say, this is what. So you end up with anyone can publish their mappings, but then if you've got them in a social graph, then you can put weight on them depending on how they're getting used. But anyway,
so that's a good idea, but even though they took a different type of approach, that's exactly what the OpenCRE project is trying to achieve. Right? Brilliant. So basically what they're doing is they're reaching out to CIS, to ISO, etc. And they're saying, look, we would like you to, when you publish your standards, that you make a reference to the OpenCRE, right? Which the idea is to be this overarching thing that connects all of the standards together. That's kind of their vision for the
perfect. For the OpenCRE and I guess that's the same thing. If I look at all these documents, they're all written as a narrative PDF. And then really what you want to do is decompose it and say, well, what's the underlying control? And then that's in a domain and a subdomain. So those are kind of like the hierarchy. Those are the sections. And you might have some narrative around that. But the meat of it is is that control, its domain and subdomain. And if you can get everyone to do that in the same way, then you can look at equivalence and you can say, so if I have a SOC audit and it's got these things, and I'm now trying to do an ISO audit, or I'm trying to do a CIS audit, you could say, well, I've got 80% of this done already, but I've still got to do these remaining pieces.
Yes, but so there was one of the things that actually a topic of discussion that I had with the OpenCRE team, which kind of in reality, it's usually not that simple. Just to give you an example, if a standard says that a session management needs to be done, and you will get one standard that says that sessions should be open for 6 hours, and another one that says 24. Right, and even though they talk about the same theme, you cannot really use the same acceptance criteria to validate against both. Right? So that type of nuance needs to be reflected somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But for my domain, which is media and entertainment, I've had a panel of 40 people look at those and say this is the right one. So we've got a primary and a equivalent. And so you can then say, look, here it is. But it's really what I'm trying to do is automate the surfacing of anomalies. But hey,
Yep.
well, I realize you're running out of time because you needed to go. Sorry.
Oh no, all good. I like this conversation. This is a good conversation. But yeah, we again going back to the point. So we've got the finish the
Yep.
standard. The talking about how we're going to tag things so that it's easily searchable and has all of those benefits that you were talking about. That's definitely one of the things we want to figure out in the next 2-3 months maximum. A bit quicker if you can get people together. And then the third aspect is all of their the work that Lewis is doing kind of himself, which is once we get to the point where we normalize the language in the fields and all of that, that we can start creating these in repeatable ways, and we can export it in JSONs and CVEs and all those other formats that make it easier to consume, and potentially even create APIs and all of that.
Perfect.
On the back of that.
Listen, Mario, maybe we can have a quick conversation. I mean, because we're right out of time. I mean, at some point next week, just let's grab half an hour and I can just
sounds good
with where I am.
Sounds good. Let's do that.
Perfect. All right.
So,
hey.
Cheers. For everyone else, please remember that we have on the Open Security Summit Slack, we've got a channel for this project. So if you want to be involved, want to keep on the conversation with us, please, if you're not invited to the OSS Slack, please just ask anyone. You've got either here or on Twitter. Reach out to me. Let me know if you need an invite. And then we can keep the conversation there. Knowing that the plan is for in the next 2 to 3 months to have something that is actually usable.
Perfect. Listen, have a great weekend. Thanks.
You too.
Great talk. Cheers.
Thank you all very much. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.